We are going to talk this afternoon about actions speak louder than words and how to put sustainability into practice. We firmly believe that the time for talking is over and we are now in the phase where we need to actually be doing. And we have a very interesting panel here today. We have Tom Harper, who's the Managing Director of Unusual Rigging. He has a master's in the circular economy. We have Jamal Chalabi, he's from a company called A Greener Future, which he'll talk to the work that they do and how you can go about implementing sustainability into your events. He is also a tour manager, and the last 2 tours that he's taken out since we've come back from the pandemic have had a really strong focus on sustainability, and he's going to talk about the actions he took and the wins that he made. Jamal and I both sit on an organisation called Live Green, which covers the ecosystem of concert touring in the UK. And Jamal and I are using our voice in the industry to really push forward some systemic changes. So we're trying to get the concert touring industry in the UK and mainland Europe to start implementing sustainability clauses in the contracts at the very start. So from the artist to the promoter to the venues, so that we can actually take it out of the riders and make it something that's legally binding. Jamal also works with the Tour Production Group, which is a collection of all the tour managers and production managers that fundamentally look after concert touring in the UK and the US, and he heads up their sustainability initiatives. And I'm going to talk about the work of the TAIT Green Book. The TAIT Green Book is something that came out of a whole collection of workshops and town hall meetings that we did over the course of lockdown, and is now being implemented in many theatres in mainland Europe, and is now in the last 18 months been translated into a total of 10 languages. And we see on mainland Europe there are clusters of people that are forming themselves into collectives that are really working to share the work of the TAIT Green Book. And in the UK now it is beginning to be taught in our colleges from technical schools. So it is really, the work of the TAIT Green Book is quite amazing. It's collective. It came about from taking the opinions and the thoughts and the practices from over 200 people, from wig makers to costume makers to producers to lighting guys to riggers to sound guys, and forming that all into one cohesive piece of work, and all brought together by an organisation called Bureau Happold. It's very pragmatic, it's very straightforward, and it's very methodical. So it covers wherever you are on your journey to sustainability. If you're new, it has a baseline concept. If you've gone to the next level, it can take you to an intermediate, and then if you're really well and truly advanced, you can go to the advanced level, and it has a breakdown of what every player in the organisation needs to do in order to be sustainable and play their part. So I'm going to just run you through some of the things that the TAIT Green Book does. But first of all, Jamal is going to kick off, and he's going to talk to us about his wins, his big wins.
About big wins. Hi everybody, I'm going to start on a hip hop tip, and anybody who wants to come closer to the stage, do feel free. But you know, if you're happy where you are, stay where you are. As Carol said, yeah, I'm a tour manager, have been for over 28 years actually. So have worked with a great diversity of acts. And it was my great privilege actually during the pandemic to start working with a lot of different people right across the industry, diving into sustainability, to look where we could make huge changes, not just in sustainability, but we started off with COVID, we looked at mental health and welfare, we looked at inclusion, diversity and quality, and with all these things obviously were governed by sustainability, or given the massive umbrella. So that was really the birth of my journey into the TPG, the Tour Production Group, and also how I got involved with A Greener Future. A Greener Future was called A Greener Festival. It's now just been rebranded. It started about 15 years ago, which was really just looking at festivals, trying to encourage them to be more sustainable, working with them to reach those goals, It also does training. It has a course at Falmouth University on sustainability, which tool managers, production managers, or anybody can go and do, so they can assess sites and they could go in there and work with the production in there to make it more sustainable. Where they also do certification, they certify and grade festivals as well. They've also got something called a Greener Arena, where they're certifying arenas. They've just done the OVO in Glasgow, the OVO in Wembley, and also the O2 Festival. So the O2 Arena have also just been certified as a Green Arenas. Also, they do CO2 analysis, but the one thing that I've been doing with them is working on a greener tour. And this was a concept that I started off when I was bringing the Horizon out on the road, which was the first UK arena tour after the pandemic. We brought them in as consultants. They actually came out on the road with us, and they showed us, because we consulted with us on all the different things we should be looking at. And the massive win there, we reduced our CO2 footprint by 38%, which was a pretty big achievement, considering everybody's trying to get 50% by 2025 or 2030. So 38% out the door with a 3-month run-up to actually getting the production out the door was a pretty key win. I won't talk about the Britain Horizon one too much, because we've replicated a lot of that stuff. We've gone further into the second tour I'm doing. Well, actually, it's from the third tour I'm doing. I actually did Massive Attack as well last year, but that turned out to be the most sustainable tour possible because they cancelled everything. So there was no CO2 emissions at all from that one. So Youngblood, we've just come back off doing a UK and a European tour. Management and the artists was really, really keen to get involved with this. They're really big on mental health and welfare and diversity too, but sustainability was a massive thing for them. So the main thing for me was for them to understand what we were talking about. And I think this is one of the issues that a lot of us has, I know I did, is what's a ton of CO2? What does that look like? What are the things? How do you quantify sustainability, greenhouse gases? There's so many figures, so many terms that are thrown around. And it was really about, what's a ton, what's 100 tons, what's a gigaton? So does anybody know what a ton of CO2 looks like? Anybody? No, well, essentially it's a 500 cubic meter hot air balloon. That's about the size of a ton of CO2. Or if you drove a car 6,000 miles, that would be the equivalent of a ton. Or if you flew from Paris and back, that would be equivalent of a ton of CO2. To New York, sorry, Paris to New York is the equivalent of a ton of CO2. There's another one as well, but I can't even remember that. There's too many figures. So it's a huge quantity. So what I did with the management for Youngblood, I did a desktop audit before we hit the road, because I knew how many trucks we'd be rolling with, I knew how many tour buses we'd be rolling with, I knew how many crew we'd have, I knew how many flights we'd be flying, I knew how many meals we'd be serving, I knew how many hotel rooms. So I could do a really broad brushstroke of what we were doing. And we ended up doing that with the Greener Festival, and we ended up at a figure of around 100 tons, and that was straight out of the bat. We've probably made more, but that was something those are the really grand figures I could get straight away. So with those figures, and the management kind of understood that, and we persuaded them with those figures to actually use HVO fuel. Now, HVO fuel, if anybody knows what it is, it's a drop-in diesel fuel, but it's made by HVO is hydrogenated vegetable oil, and it reduces its CO2 emissions around about 80 to 90%. So it's a huge drop in CO2 emissions. So by showing the amount of CO2 we'd be making, we persuaded management to switch to HVO, which reduced from 100 tons to about 55 tons. So it's a huge win on that one. Also, there's a price difference between HVO and diesel. Diesel is cheaper, obviously. HVO is slightly more expensive, probably due to the taxing, that it doesn't have it has a worse tax rate than diesel does. But also if you add removals to it. But anyway, I won't go too deeply into that, but management went for it, and so we reduced our emissions almost by 50% straight out of that. Well, as I said, that's good. So that was a really, really good thing, to really quantify and show them on paper what their emissions were. Past that, we started looking at really what is, I call the Dale Vince Holy Trinity, which is really power, travel, and food. The first thing was, power. We basically looked at production and the design, and we basically got our design as small as it possibly could be, so it would fit in a small amount of trucks, less CO2 emissions. We also, all the light fixtures we used were all LED, which reduced their draw by around about 90%. Now, that doesn't really affect it when you go into venues, but it's really, really important when you go to festivals. Because when you go to a festival, you basically give them what your power draw is, or should give them an accurate power draw. And it allows festivals then to quantify what generators or how many generators they need. So having the correct draw of our production was really, really important. It's something we all should be looking at. Every production that goes out on the road, every vendor that goes into a festival, anyone who sets up anything should know your correct power draw, as opposed just to the size of your plug socket. So that was a really, really key thing to do. So yeah, we reduced our power by LED, and then the next really big thing was travel. We obviously by using HVO fuel, we reduced our emissions enormously. Obviously by reducing our pack, we reduced our truck size as well. So there's loads of little things we did on that front. The big one, I think, was the biggest learning curve on this tour was really food. And I must admit, when somebody first said, let's talk about catering, I kind of laughed. But thinking, really, that's the best you can do? You want to talk about food? But food, in actual fact, once I dug into it, is 25% of global emissions. Food production causes 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. And some startling figures for that is that 77% of the land that we use is basically to feed animals that we either eat or use for dairy. And the other main startling figure is that 50% of the food from farm to fork gets thrown away. So anybody out there going, well, it's sustainability, yeah, great, but who's going to pay for it? Well, these are where we're losing money. We're throwing 50% of the food that we produce away. We could be feeding the third world. So anyway, moving on to that one. I'm just about to. So catering. It's a really, really emotional thing when you're on the road. I don't know how many people actually go out on the road here. Any crew in the audience? No, okay. So, you're working extremely long hours, an 18-hour day is not unheard of, and so food is really, really key. And so going to a rodeo and telling me you're not going to have any red meat is a difficult thing. But we achieved it. So we went out and we did a no red meat tour. We took red meat off the menu, basically because red meat is the largest CO2 and methane producer. Methane is 25 times more lethal than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So we took red meat off the menu. We also had this pre-ordering system, so we would pre-order our meals the day before, which allowed catering to run so much more efficiently. They would be able to, get the exact quantity of meals. They were buying much less protein than they actually needed. They'd usually buy about 40 units of protein above the numbers, but this time they were just doing 10. So we were not only saving on the produce, we were also saving money. We also had one less caterer out because with the pre-ordering system, it ran so much more efficiently, we didn't need the extra pair of hands. The other massive win was single-use plastics. Everybody carried their own refillable bottle. We had all the local crew bring their own refillable bottles, and we had water fountains everywhere. It was just so simple, it was ridiculous. Even on the buses, we had upturned water bottles with pumps on. Everybody loved it. They were drinking more water, and we saved, I think, about 6,000 bottles of single-use plastic across a 2-week period. So that was a really, really straightforward, easy win. I could dig deeper into that, but I'm conscious of time, and so I will go to questions later. Over to Tom.
I'm going to just quickly run through what we were doing on the Theta Green book. I'm just going to talk about who created it and why. I touched base on it during lockdown. We started creating a whole load of workshops and realised that there was lots of people out there that wanted to be more sustainable in their productions, but they just didn't know how to go about doing it. So we pulled together over 200 people, and we brought in Bureau Happold, and out of that came this beautiful piece of work that, as I said before, we're now teaching in schools and colleges. So it is a very simple piece of work. We have one which is called the Theatre Green Book, which is just for actual putting on a production. Then there is a second guide, which is how to be sustainable in your operation of a venue. And then the third one is if you're actually so courageous that you want to go out and build a venue, or you want to start doing a refurb to your venue, this is where you want to be landing. So there are 3 pieces of work on the website for a Theatre Green Book, and it's definitely something that you should go and explore and have a look at, because it is just the most beautiful piece of work that you can follow. The uptake for it has been absolutely amazing. Our national theatres in Scotland, Wales and England are all using them. Our big opera houses are using them. I went on a call with Opera Europa just last month, and out of the 81 companies from mainland Europe that were on that call, a significant amount of them were running from the Theatre Green Book. It was absolutely phenomenal. We are seeing that it's not quite so easy for companies that are in commercial theatre to take it on board, because in commercial theatre usually you're finding that your organisation is brought together for one particular production, and it's easier to use the Theatre Green Book if you're in a permanent venue where the same people are coming to work every day, and you can start really implementing the processes and getting everybody on board. That said, it's not impossible if you're in commercial to do it. You just need to have a bit more of a push. So if I just show you some of the guidance that the Theatre Green Book produces, really, whether you're doing a basic, an intermediate or an advanced level, it follows the same kind of framework. So the first big thing really is, the big ticket item, is when you're starting your production, is you want to lay the foundation of what sustainability means to your production. I know that some companies now are beginning to put sustainability clauses in for their creatives, for their directors and for their artists right at the top, so that everybody knows that this production and what its values are going to be based on. When you're pulling together your team, it's really important that the entire team knows which level you want to be working to. And really you have to consider, as Jamal has pointed out, sometimes there are budget implications for sustainability. Definitely at the moment it's more expensive to use sustainable materials in a lot of instances. However, as Jamal's pointed out, there are wins also to be had. If you can start reducing, if you can reduce the number of crew you're having, you can reduce the number of trucks you're having, or if you can cut back on your catering, you should see wins. So the end game should be that you should get to a neutral situation. You do also need to make sure that you have enough time in your schedule, because to be sustainable, you're going to have to do an awful lot more collaboration. You're going to have to say, we don't quite have this in stock, but we have this in stock. Could you slightly change your idea, Mr. Designer or Mrs. Designer, and adapt and modify what we already have? So you do need a longer lead time so that you can take into account the toing and froing that's necessary. We also, in the Theatre Green Book, we really advocate not just having a white model of your show, so not just getting a white model out in front of everybody and saying, okay, when we do this scene change or when we do this move or whatever, does this all work? Taking that meeting where you're discussing your green card model, your white card model, and actually turning it into a green card meeting of how sustainable are all of these elements. So that is a huge win. Then obviously you need to get your procurement people on board, because if you're going to start buying hopefully new materials that are either recycled or recyclable. And the big wins obviously come in when you start to think about making, because what you really want to be doing in the design process is that if you're making something new, you want to be designing it for the circular economy, so that when you're finished with it, if you're not going to put it back into your stock to be reused again in the future, everything can come back out into its nutrient streams so that it can be reused again. So when you get to that disposal stage, you're either putting things back into stock to use for future productions, or they're going into recycling streams to be used again in the future. And then at the very end, the last thing you want to be doing is evaluating what worked well and what didn't work well. Now, obviously for us as an industry, we're in the embryonic stages of sustainability, so we're going to make a lot of mistakes. And the only really bad mistake to make is a mistake that you make again and again and again. If you make a mistake and you fess up to it and say that was a bad move, and here's why it was a bad move, and I'm not going to do it again, and you're open and you're frank and you share that information, you can actually turn that mistake into something that is a win. So, as I said, if you go online and you take a look at the Theta Green Book, it is absolutely wonderful. It's laid out, it tells you if you're in a baseline, an intermediate or an advanced level. It tells you, you can look to see where you sit on the ecosystem. If you're a producer or a designer or whatever, you can see what stage you're at in the production, and it tells you exactly all of the things that you can do, with links to further details of how you can really advance your practice. So it doesn't need somebody to come in and train your organization. It's something that's intuitive and it's broken down, and the methodology is really quite amazing that you can take it on board yourself. They've also done really cool things for people that that haven't gone through any carbon literacy training, where this is a whole brand new subject for you. It takes you up simple things like the material hierarchy of what you want to be doing when you're designing something. Obviously, you want to avoid everything that's at the bottom in the red and get to the green at the top. And then equally, they don't just take it on the making of whatever it is you're doing, they bring you back down the other side, so that we're obviously wanting to adopt the green behaviour at the top when it comes to disposal, and the bottom when we get to the bottom of going to landfill. So it really is, it's very simple in the way it's written, it's very easy to understand, and you don't need any detailed training before you go into it. The last thing that it does as well is organisations like A Greener Future are absolutely amazing. If you want to really understand what your carbon footprint is and you're really committed to reducing it, and you are totally on board with either offsetting or investing in carbon capture so that you get to a neutral place at the end of your performance. If, however, the thought of all that is just like way too much, what you can do with the Theta Green Book is they've created a materials inventory. So this is much simpler, it's much easier for people to understand, and really it's basically about how much stuff that you have from your production comes from existing things, and how much at the end of the show you're going to put back into material inventory, or you're going to then put into recycling. And this is very simple and very straightforward. It would be something that you would use if you were on a base level or an intermediate level, and if you were somebody that was way more advanced, you'd get a company in like A Greener Future to come and help you do your carbon calculations. I would say though that some of our bigger theatres in the UK now are actually calculating not just their materials inventory, but they're also doing their carbon footprint. So the guys at the National Theatre in the UK in London, they actually do both. And I'm just going to before I hand you over to Tom, so Tom's going to talk about what you can do as a vendor, I'd just like to share some of the big wins that people have had when they've used the Theta Green Book. The National Theatre in the UK, since 2018, have cut back by 45% the amount of sheet material that they buy in now, because they've started using the Theta Green Book. We've seen that There are theatres now that are no longer using polystyrene anymore. They've gone back to the old-fashioned way. They're looking at using hemp and textured paint. We've seen in the UK that kids are coming out of colleges now and they're talking the talk. And I think from a cultural change, one of the biggest wins that we can possibly take is at one of the theatres that was using the Theatre Green Book, the crew that were in the workshop went to the production manager and said, we think that the carbon emissions, the embedded carbon in the thing that you're asking us to build is way too high for the 30 seconds that this thing is going to be on stage. So we would like you to go back to the designer and ask them to rethink the concept. When you get to the point of your organisation all walking the talk and all understanding to that level, that is absolutely incredible. And just recently, we had a young man come and start work at my company at TAIT, and we're in the process of teaching carbon literacy, and I was running workshops. And at the end of it, he came up to me and he said, I'm really glad that we're doing this as an organisation because I come from the national and sustainability is really important. And I was disappointed to come to a company where it didn't have such clout in the organisation. So I'm glad the company that I'm working for is moving in that direction. So I think that these are the big cultural wins that we can have when everybody starts understanding and starts talking and starts moving in that direction. And to that end, what Tom is going to talk to us about is there's lots of vendors here in this exhibition. What Tom's done at Unusual Rigging is quite incredible of what they've done as a company, not just with their operation, but now actually with their buildings. And he's going to share the story so that hopefully it will inspire you to do the same.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, so like many of us here, actually all we do, and my late father would have said, is that we're a rental company. So that's ultimately what circularity is really about, from one basic perspective. But just to step back for one moment and think about what the point of sustainability is and what it really means. The easiest consideration is to think about the Brundtland Report of 1987, which defined sustainability as the ability of the current generation to meet its needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. So I always think that's useful to remember what the baseline definition is. Sustainability fundamentally, and great wins, as you can see from what Jamal has talked about. In fact, in terms of materials and embedded CO2, I think the most challenging element of embedded CO2 is in the egos of a lot of the performers. And it's trying to get them to think about, their material footprint with regard to being big and brilliant for their next productions. Stepping beyond the idea of sustainability, which is fundamentally about doing less bad, it's kind of saying, we know we do bad, we know we all have a massive carbon footprint, or we're reducing our carbon footprint. Let's do less of it. But fundamentally, we're doing the same thing, we're just doing less of it. And then the circular economy comes along and says, well, we might live on a finite planet, but we have infinite creativity. I mean, look at nature, for goodness sakes. 3.8 billion years of research and development under her belt, and there is no such thing as waste, whatever. So the beauty of the idea of the circular economy is that we start to mimic or imitate nature's genius. Instead of thinking about what can we do to extract from nature, to take, make, and waste, how can we imitate nature in terms of the brilliant 3.8 billion years of research and development and make sure that there is zero waste? The other thing to consider as well is that actually CO2 is a really valuable element. It's comprised one of the 7 core building blocks for everything on the planet. And without it, none of us would be here. So it's about thinking more creatively and tapping into our infinite creativity, which, as part of the creative industries, you'd think we'd have a lot of. So we've been very lucky at Unusual in that fundamentally we started off as a rental business. We were involved with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who have pioneered the concept of the circular economy by learning about the concepts and the key principles of the circular economy as part of a master's program. And we were able to apply the theory and put it into practice at Unusual. So we still do what we do, we just changed how we do what we do. And we started looking at how we measure what we do so that we can consider the element of, well, how high our carbon footprint is and where the low-hanging fruit is to make changes. So we've had some very good, successful stories over the last 7 years. We were selected as a finalist by the World Economic Forum in their circular scheme at Davos in 2017, and that spurred us on to continue to make changes, which I won't talk about now. But I'm just going to talk about the sort of pinnacle element, which ties into this idea of CO2 in the atmosphere. How can we capture it? How can we sequester it? So we decided a while ago that we were going to build a brand new HQ, a new set of offices, update the whole of our site. And the image there is the concept design you can see. Now, we could have taken the conventional route, which would have been far less cost by doing cement, steel structure, but for every single kilogram of steel, there is 0.7 kilograms of associated CO2 emissions embedded within it. Whereas here, you can see we've decided to go with a wood and a glulam structure for structural purposes, as well as all of the timber facade. And as a result of that, we're actually sequestering. So we're moving towards a model that is regenerative by design. The ultimate goal, and we break ground in July of this year, the ultimate goal is that by this time next year, we have a building that operationally operates like a termite mound. So a termite mound, again, going back to nature and her genius, a termite mound is a structure that's been built for over 50 million years, and some of the longest known lasting termite mounds, some of them are over 1,000 years old in the various plains of Africa. And they're designed in such a way by tiny little termites to have a median temperature that's constant throughout day and night, regardless of fluctuations outside of up to 50-degree fluctuations. They remain the same. It's the same temperature inside. So in more sort of modern parlance, and also from a human perspective, we know that as a passive house build. The problem with the passive house is that you're basically sealing in an airtight environment. So we've decided to take a lot of different disciplines like circular economic principles, passive house concepts, and sustainability. And we've come up with this, which is basically a smart building that will respond in line with the movement of the sun during the day, south-facing, and its median temperature will remain the same. There will be shutters that move across the windows, and it all sounds wonderful, and you probably think, my God, well, this is going to be ridiculously expensive compared to the conventional way, and also aren't you risking regulatory adherence by, treading in novel ground? Well, the brilliant thing is that REBA and also a lot of the consultants that we've engaged with are pushing for regulatory evolution. And so we are doing something quite new and novel, but we're not the first. There are other building developers like NASA and other architects like William McDonough, for example, who have been working on these sorts of concepts before. So we're just excited that we're able to put our money where our mouth is. Yes, it's going to cost us a bit more in some instances, but again, that's thinking about the true cost as opposed to the capped hidden externalities costs that we never see in production. So the hope is, well, the definite aspiration is that the building will be up and running, and anybody that wants to come and see it and have an understanding of how it works and what it eventually costs us and how much we've managed to sequester carbon-wise as opposed to use and emit, would be happy to share that with you.
And do you just want to share about the landscaping, and do you want to share about this?
Oh, yes. So it'll be run on renewables. So it adheres to the principles of a circular economy, that we're designing an economy that is regenerative and restorative by design, that runs on renewables, is designed for disassembly and durability and long and eventual disassembly if we wanted to change things. So it's a modular design. And we're also regenerating the landscape around the building. So we're putting in a pond, inviting any newts that might be in the area that aren't currently in the area, putting in a beehive. We're really, trying to think about what elements here that have nothing to do with day-to-day business but will enrich and enhance our own personal experience of living and working on what Unusual has always done, which is to be a hire company.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We have a stunning 7 minutes left. We could open the house up for questions if anybody would like to ask anybody questions on the panel. No? Okay. I'm going to ask a couple of questions then. So,
before you do that, Carol, I know we touched on this, but and you've both touched on this afternoon about cultural change, and I think it's really important to highlight that and why these conversations that we're having is so important, and why the live industry is so key to making cultural change. And my belief is that, you know, music crosses all boundaries, it crosses all borders, it crosses all cultures, it crosses all languages, and it really reaches everybody in a deep emotional way. And I think that's why it's important for us to get our house in order, so we can, you know, the artists can go out there and do what they do, the creative people can go out there and do what they do, to change people's behaviour and make a cultural difference. And I think that, you know, will we change sustainability across the planet if the music industry changed tomorrow? Probably not. But the cultural change that we can actually make is absolutely huge, and I think that's a really, really valuable point for why we should be doing this and why we should be engaging the people that we interact with.
I completely agree, and I think that one of the things that that comes up again and again and again is, how can we create change when our governments and big businesses don't want to create change? And I would say, back in the day, when my grandmother was born, women didn't have the right to vote. When she went to work in America, black people and white people were not allowed to sit on the bus together. By the time I was born, women had the right to vote, and black people and white people sat on the bus together. This is not because government wanted to change, and this is not because big business wanted to change. It's because ordinary, everyday people, like everyone that's in this exhibition today, got up and said, we don't like the current story, we do not like the narrative, and we want it to change. And everybody just moved forward in their own way, and they created the change. So the change is upon us. Like, there's no point in waiting for somebody else to do it. We have to do it ourselves. And when we're in a moment of crisis, people constantly say they should do this, they should do that. There is no they. We are the they, and it's on us to create the change. So I would say, for all of you people that are here in the room, you're probably already the converts, but if you can go out and convert another 10, get them to convert another 10, then we're on our way and we're unstoppable. So to that point, I'm going to ask Tom, what would be your one takeaway for people to do today?
I think engage with the theatre Green Book and a lot of the resources that are online that have been discussed, because actually the time that's been taken to simplify and elucidate in order to provide clear, clean frameworks that people can adhere to make changes wherever they are within their organisation, from the top through to just being started as a new recruit. There's so much good content there that people can just check in with and go, that affects me. I have some control and I'm empowered to do something about that. So I'd say it's about education and taking advantage of the excellent resources that there now are online.
And Jamal?
I don't have such an eloquent answer as Tom is, but I would say very, very simple stuff is I would go out and really educate yourself on the climate crisis and how vital it is that what we need to do without terrifying yourself. And some simple stuff, I would go home and change your energy provider to a green energy provider and change your pension to a greener pension. That's what I would do.
Perfect. And I think to close off, I would say don't be afraid to use your voice. You have a voice, you have a vote, you have many people that you touch in your communities and your families. And if this is something that touches your heart, that was sent to you as a message, and it's a gift, and it's a gift that you can give, and you can go out and you can change the world. Thank you very much, everybody.
You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need anybody's permission, just do it.